Melanie Warner. Her book, Pandora's Lunchbox, is now out and takes a look at how processed foods have taken over the American diet. Melanie, welcome to Eat, Drink, Explore Radio.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. I know you're in New York, you're running around, and we appreciate you taking a few moments out of your busy schedule to join us.
Yeah, happy to.
So, when did this all begin? When did it switch over from things grown in your own yard, fresh vegetables at the market, to processed foods really creeping their way into our diets?
Yeah, well, processed food really represents a new way of eating for us, as not just as Americans, but as human beings. And it really started roughly about 100 years ago. This was when the processed food industry, there was no processed food before that. Most of the things that we see in the grocery store in the middle aisles and at fast food restaurants just simply didn't exist 100 years ago. And it really started with the first wave, or one of the first waves, of urban migration. As people moved to the cities, we needed to centralize food production. People who didn't live on farms, they couldn't grow their own food. And then it really just took off from there, and particularly accelerated after the Second World War.
I would imagine that it was also sort of a side effect of trying to keep food from spoiling.
It was, absolutely. I mean, we've had, throughout our human history, we've had all kinds of ways to prevent food from spoiling. Things like fermenting food, salting it. We salt meat and salt fish.
Mm-hmm.
That's been a very effective way. Drying it. And so once you got processed food, as it marched throughout the 20th century, there were new ways of trying to preserve food, and very often it was through chemical preservatives, which was a fundamentally different way of looking at saving food and preparing food, if you can even call it that.
Mm-hmm. If you can call it that.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that comment, Melanie. I was looking at your website and reading the little blurb about your book, and it says that about 70% of the calories we consume are basically processed foods. I am now starting to think about what I eat. That seems like a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. I mean, that's basically the majority of our diets coming from these, and it's really these highly processed foods as well. And when I was doing the book, I uncovered quite a lot of things that are processed foods that we necessarily don't think of as processed foods. I mean,
oh, good, because I was going to ask you, at what point does it turn to, like, would you consider cheese a processed food?
A natural cheese, no. I mean, that would be a minimally processed food,
okay,
right? I mean, it is, you have to create cheese, but cheese goes back for centuries and centuries.
So give us some examples. Give us examples, Melanie, of things that we might not think about as being processed food, because I want to know maybe what choices I can change.
Right.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorites is Subway. I looked at the Subway sandwich, the chicken onion sweet teriyaki sandwich. And one day I was looking at Subway's ingredient list, and I added up all the ingredients, and they total 105.
Whoa.
Which is a lot, right? I mean, if you made this item at home, how many ingredients would you use? Maybe 12, even if you bought bread at the store. So that's just one example of something that people think of. Subway's done a great job of promoting themselves as a healthy alternative and eat fresh. But when you look at how it's actually made, it's a very standard process of industrialized food, and particularly their bread as well.
The number of ingredients connected to a food is directly related to its level of processing?
Sometimes. I mean, that's generally a good marker. If things have a 3-paragraph list of ingredients, and a lot of them are things that you don't recognize or things that you don't have at home in your home kitchen or couldn't buy at the supermarket, then that's a good marker for it being a processed food, yeah.
So, Melanie, I remember the big furor nationwide over pink slime. Such a appetizing name, too. And then when
You're talking about the beef, right?
The beef. And then when we all realized just how much of it we likely had been consuming without even realizing it, there was a real big ew factor in that. But what about liquid chicken?
Liquid chicken?
Liquid chicken, isn't that what they make the McNuggets or most nuggets out of?
Are you talking? You're talking about the mechanically separated chicken, maybe, right? That's where they kind of.
And then it's like extruded out in a big like paste, and I guess probably those dinosaur formed chicken nuggets are made out of it. I would guess.
Sometimes it'll be listed on the ingredient list. A lot of times it goes into hot dogs. Definitely, that's one.
Oh,
Sometimes
right.
you'll see it in cheaper version of nuggets. Yeah, it's where they take basically a meat carcass and they push it through a screen and they pulverize it into almost like a smoothie, a meat smoothie. And you can't do it with beef, but chicken is done this way a lot, and it's called mechanically separated chicken. Although it should just be called a chicken smoothie.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't that sound just
I think when we educate
Appetizing.
ourselves about what we're eating, it almost helps you make the right choices because of the gross out factor.
Melanie,
Yeah.
we've clearly been on a trend toward more processed foods over the last 3-4 decades, but is that trend starting to subside, and are we turning back the clock a little?
I think that there is more. There are signs that people are starting to wake up and realize that the journey that our food goes on is important, and it's important to know where our food is coming from. So people are seeking out fresher alternatives and healthier foods, and some people are trying to do a little bit more cooking. I saw the other day that sales of avocados last year were up 35%. That would seem to be a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still, as a society, we're still very, very reliant on processed food and fast food. I think the message still hasn't really reached a wide section of the population.
Mm.
So, Melanie, this may be a bit of an extreme comparison, but it just reminds me of that old movie, that Soylent Green, where people couldn't eat normal food anymore, and then they had to come up with this processed form. And I mean, obviously, that's an extreme situation, but
They were eating themselves in Soylent Green. Let's hope we don't get to that point. For sure.
Yeah, there are some scientists working on trying to create meat in a test tube. Maybe you've heard of that. That's something that's a little very far off, and I don't think the food industry is even embracing that because that has an extreme growth out factor for people. Test tube meat.
Melanie, you were mentioning the number of ingredients at Subway. It just so happens that next hour at this same time slot, we are welcoming a writer on, Laura Rabinovich with Good. I don't know if you've ever been to the website good.is, but...
I have, yeah.
Okay, so they are pushing a campaign called Fewer Fridays where you host a dinner party and the number of ingredients has to be less than or fewer than the number of guests that you have.
That's great.
Based on the whole ingredient thing that you mentioned. So we'll be speaking about that straight ahead, and I imagine processed foods are not recommended.
No. And it's just things like Subway. I mean, the restaurants get a pass at this because it's very hard to sometimes find the ingredients. Sometimes a lot of restaurants don't even list them, like Applebee's. You can't find the ingredient list. They won't tell you.
Right.
So in places like Subway, you have to go on their website and hunt around for it. But it's worth doing it. It's worth taking a look.
Author Melanie Warner, Pandora's Lunchbox. Learn more at melaniewarner.com. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy your day in New York.
Thank you so much.
All right, stick around, everyone. Just after the break, we understand we do have the